On this week's show, stalking priests, weird saints, and lock up your daughters. Welcome back to Free for Friday, also known as the Friday Threesome. It's been a while and I've missed you. This week we have 3 films from cult British exploitation director Pete Walker. He's been compared to people like Derek Ford and Stanley Long, both of whom pretty much worked exclusively in sexploitation and sometimes porn. The best comparison is to Norman J. Warren, who sadly died in 2001. Luckily Pete Walker is still with us, and like Warren, he has directed sexploitation and horror films, often merging both together. We are reviewing 3 films ahead of the 88 Films box set, and we are reviewing 1 film from the box set, Home Before Midnight, from my Salvation Blu-ray release. First up, it's The House of Mortal Sin, also known as The Confessional and The Confessional Murders. In this film, a vulnerable young woman visits a priest and confesses to having an abortion. He records the confession and blackmails her. The thing to bear in mind is abortion was illegal in Britain up until 1967. Roughly 10 years before this came out, and still was highly frowned upon when the film was released. Had this film been made today, there wouldn't be a plot, as society and public opinion has changed considerably. There's also loads of fairly nasty murders happening as well. The film was in what we would call development hell, with the script going through various revisions, with co-writer David McGillivray. Walker liked the concept and hoped it would cause a scandal, like The Devils, The Exorcist and Mark of the Devil did. Sadly, there was barely a whimper. House of Mortal Sin, despite being critical of Catholicism and how authority can corrupt, wasn't a scandal or a box office smash. Listen to this.
With me? What for? We're going to the police.
You think I haven't been? It's no good. They won't listen. He's a priest, you see, and he's been too clever.
We've got parallels to the sexual abuse scandals that were exposed worldwide within the priesthood. This film merges elements of slasher and domestic kitchen sink drama, but this isn't an episode of Coronation Street. The film has a super sharp script, packed with snappy dialogue, often tongue-in-cheek, cinematography way above its budget, and a cracking score by Stanley Myers, who has scored films such as Deer Hunter and The Witches, the good version by Nicholas Roeg. Sadly, the film came a little too late, and was seen as being a bit campy. As well, we had pre-exploitation, that's honestly what I'm calling it, like The Exorcist, out years before this film, and we also had proto-slashers like The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Twisted Nerve and Black Christmas, all better films and all out at least 2 years before this one came out, and they're also arguably more shocking in terms of violence.
Oh, we ain't here, but it'll be here about an hour!
Oh.
Next film is Schizo, a film whose title and poster catchphrase were heavily criticised by mental health charity Mind. This was the late 1970s though, and like House of Mortal Sin, this is another proto-slasher. We've got British beauty Lynn Frederick, who died much too young in her early 40s, as Samantha, a schizophrenic young woman who may or may not imagine an imposing man stalking her. That's all I can really add without giving away major spoilers. This suffers from the same problems as House of Mortal Sin. Better slashers were already out at the time, despite predating Halloween, and even if it is nasty, and undoubtedly the most violent film on this list, it just doesn't have the same oomph as Texas Chainsaw. It was seen as being a bit tongue-in-cheek and camp at the time, but it's hard to deny it is still a very good film in terms of pacing, scripting, and cheap thrills. Last but in no means least is Home Before Midnight. It is the newest film on this list and the only one ChatGPT says doesn't exist. In this film we have Ginny, played by Alison Elliott, who you might know from Brit's exploitation film Killer's Moon. Ginny is a 14-year-old schoolgirl who meets Mike Beresford, musician of band Bad Accident, a tongue-in-cheek name if ever there was one. Mike and Ginny have a largely sexual relationship, but after seeing her bracelet with her date of birth on, he gets cold feet. The film makes a lot of social commentary about concerns at the time. Bear in mind, in the late 1950s, we had the birth of a teenager, and later on we had a report calling for the lowering of the age of consent. Home Before Midnight doesn't get the balance right of social issues film and exploitation film. It's a darn sight more interesting than Ken Loach's Poor Cow, but but the critics who described it as grubby and sexist are probably right. The script, co-written by Michael Armstrong, who also co-wrote Eskimo Now, which has a knob in a clapperboard gag, has a lot of innuendo and never manages to be serious. The subject itself is grimy and contentious, even now. Red Fish Tank tackles similar themes, but with less humour and also arguably less intelligence to nuance and meaning. I love a sleazy film, but Home Before Midnight commits the crime of being about 40 minutes too long and taking an eternity and a day to reach what is, admittedly, a satisfying conclusion. We have a winner, a loser, and a middle. And this week's winner is, drumroll please, House of Mortal Sin, which I thought was a very good film. I actually thought every single film on this list was very good in its own way. House of Mortal Sin is a proto-slasher. If you expect a violent horror film, you're probably going to be disappointed. It is quite a slow film at 100 minutes or so. It actually spends a lot of time building character. There's some absolutely fantastic acting in there. Soundtrack, moody, atmospheric, and really professionally composed. Cinematography way above its £50,000 or so budget. It looks to me like it cost £1 million. Second, it's a difficult one. I'm sort of torn, but I'd say it's Schizo. Yeah, it's a fun film. It's a slasher. It doesn't take itself too seriously. Obviously, at the time it came out, it was more politically acceptable to tackle, should we say, mental health issues insensitively. And it does tackle them insensitively, let's be honest. Very violent in places. Even though the blood looks a bit like that sort of watery red paint stuff rather than the much better gore effects you get now, it's still violent and it still has an impact. There's the same cinematographer and composer as House of Mortal Sin, and it is a very good film. And the lowest film, and even then it's still a very good film, is Home Before Midnight. Mainly, and the only reason is because it was, like I say, 40 minutes too long, and nearly 2 hours for what is effectively an exploitation film dealing with a sleazy subject. Yes, exploitation drama, why not? It reminded me a lot of Groupie Girl, which I think is maybe a better film. Like I say, maybe. And also it doesn't really stand out because there was a lot of these films out in the 70s in Britain. The only thing it really stands out against is the sort of sex comedy films because they were crap and they weren't sexy. And Home Before Midnight isn't sexy, but it's not crap. It tries to shoehorn in this social issue of, well, if you like, who was wrong, who was right, sexual politics, really. Well, all of these films get billed as being a bit sort of camp. All the acting in it is sincere and it is very good acting, as is the production values on all the films. They're not films where they are shit, in my opinion. And they're also not films where they are deliberately taking the piss. And we've had that more so in the last 20 years with films like Lesbian Vampire Killers and as I say, films like Lesbian Vampire Killers, they're not absolute dog shit, they are watchable, but they're not sincere. They are deliberately made to appeal to a straight-to-video streaming audience who like the horror. Whereas these Pete Walker films were made for cinema, they look cinematic, they feel cinematic, they have proper scripting, proper editing, proper direction. Pete Walker retired from filmmaking in 1981, I want to say off the top of my head. Basically saw the film industry changing, and he was right. The British film industry pretty much went down the toilet in the 1980s, with a lot of films not being made or the budget being massively reduced. And then it never really picked up, in my opinion, until about the early 90s. And you had a lot of UK-US co-productions, so we had to borrow other people's money. And they were films like Four Weddings and a Funeral, which was a massive success. If you like this video, do subscribe, like, share, comment, all that good stuff. Channel's growing slowly, but it is growing. Also, I'd say do check out the Pete Walker book, Making Mischief, The Cult Forms of Pete Walker. I do own it, and it was used in the research of this video. Luckily, I bought it an absolutely long time ago, about 10 years ago, and I paid about £15. I looked on Amazon and the prices were £60, and in my opinion, it's not worth that sort of money. Even though there's a lot of good information in there, and it does have interviews with Pete Walker as well, commenting on his films. It's not worth £60 in my opinion. It's not that good. Also, check out the book Offbeat, which was another one I used for research, which is really good, and that's at the moment available for a reasonable price, around the £30 mark. Also, when the box set comes out, I personally will be picking up a copy because it also features the Pete Walker film which pretty much disappeared off the planet, which was known as the Sex Pistols film, which I will be getting just for that sole reason, as I've seen every single other film in the box set, and tune in for more great stuff.
Just walk out after her. Isn't that rather strange? Why should you particularly have noticed Mr. Beresford leaving at that time?
Well, he's a pretty dishy-looking bloke, isn't he?